Okay. So we will begin with our first speaker. I'd like to introduce Sheila. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
You're on mute.
Okay, everybody should be able to hear me. Thanks. I'd like to thank both organizations for allowing me to speak because all of you are students, and I haven't been a student in quite a number of years. And it was my suggestion that we do both articles and books so that people could enter the conversation wherever they were. So I picked the article, and the article is called The Great White Heist, and it's by Michael Harrod, and it was in Yes Magazine. The university does not own this magazine, but it used to be on newsstands, but it's pretty difficult to find it now because of how the media and publishing has changed. This year, they did a, a whole issue on Black Lives Matter, and this is what the issue looked like. And the issue, this article was contained in that issue. Michael Harrod is a journalist for Root Magazine, and um, the question he was writing about the question of reparations and should African Americans receive reparations. And his whole argument focuses on slavery is the usual argument for reparations, but there's another reason. And I found that his reason was very compelling because it was something that I had never thought about. Uh, the article starts with the Summerton, South Carolina, in Summerton, South Carolina, which is a small hamlet in South Carolina in 1948. And during this time, schools were segregated. And he talks about how these children, these Black children, had to walk to school. They had to walk 9 miles to school. Whereas later, the Black parents found out that the white children had 33 buses to get them to school. And so they were outraged and they went to the NAACP and they filed a lawsuit. Well, this lawsuit morphed into being part of Brown versus Education. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, Brown versus the Board of Education. And as a result, segregated schools were struck down. But that's just where he starts. He points to the fact that even if you dismiss slavery and reparations for slavery, he makes the case that all white people have benefited from the labor of African Americans throughout US history. And he makes the case that it's been done because through taxes, all of us pay federal, state, and local taxes. How those taxes are allocated um, have not been distributed equally, and it's been done under the law. And that's the first time I had heard this argument presented that way, that it was our tax dollars. And when I think about my tax dollars going to not being distributed fairly, well, then that explains why schools in Detroit have less money than schools in Bloomfield Hills, because the laws have been written and interpreted to benefit those populations. He also points out that African Americans were robbed of wealth by the government. The government was implicit in robbing them of wealth. He gives the example of World War II, where the GI Bill was passed, and that allowed um, people to go, GIs to go to get benefits to go to school. and to get housing. Well, African Americans got those benefits, but because everything was segregated, schools were segregated, housing was segregated, they didn't reap that benefit. And through the generations, they weren't able to build wealth. And I found his argument compelling because I had never thought about it. And part of the reason I guess I've never thought about it, even though I had Black history in college, it depends on where you're at in your mindset. And my mind was not on African American history, even though that was in the 60s and people were talking about these things. That just glossed over me. My focus was just to get out of college, and I concentrated on that. But younger people, uh, um, Ta-Nehisi Coates comes to mind because he wanted to know, well, how was everything systematic so that Black people were robbed of wealth? And so he again lays out a whole plan. So then that resonated with me, and I'm older, so I wanted to know, well, how did they do that? If you're going to say we deserve reparations, on what basis? Okay, because not only did white people own slaves, but the African Americans owned slaves. And African Americans, some of them made a good living having owned slaves. So it can't just be about slavery. So that's why I selected that particular article. It's a short article. And as a librarian, I read all the time. I read every day. I read something. Usually it doesn't focus on African Americans. But I will say this, because of the times that we're living in, you're getting more and more people who are writing about specific issues, and then it becomes in the mainstream. So you get to read about a lot of what, not only what happened in history, but what African Americans are thinking. Um, I just want to make one other point about this article, and that was he mentioned that the Brookings Institute in 2016 said the median average white wealth was $171,000, whereas the median wealth of a typical Black family was around 17,000. And I heard that not only in 2016, but when the blockbuster movie. Now the name escapes me. Um, it'll come back, but it escapes me right now. Then they talked about how um, there was this disparity, and I didn't believe it, but this points out that it reaffirms that that's what happened. So that's all I have to say about that particular article. Um, the second item that I wanted to talk about was Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. And Brian Stevenson, for those of you who may know, he's been on a lot of commercials on PBS. Um, he was responsible for one of the founders of the Equal Justice Initiative, and he was he's an attorney. And as a young attorney, he founded this, and he concentrates on helping those people who have not been treated well in the criminal justice system. And there's also a movie about this book. I did not look at the movie because by the time I got through reading the book, I was just really full of what I didn't know, and how profound I thought this book was. Brian Stevenson is an excellent writer. He just gets to the point, and the book centers around the founding of the Equal Justice Initiative and the case of Walter McMillan. And he was a young African American man who was sentenced to die for a notorious murder that he did not commit. And it was the murder of a young white woman. And Because of circumstances, Walter McMillan was arrested. And what I found just unbelievable was that the prosecutor, the they all knew that this man did not commit this murder, but they still proceeded for years to try to prosecute him for this crime. They went so far as to place him on death row, and he hadn't even gone to court yet. That's unheard of for you to be just charged with something and then be placed on death row. But as a civilian, not in the criminal justice system and not knowing how that system works, if everybody is complicit, then you can be put on death row. And just the experience on death row had a profound effect on his life. I mean, when he describes the burning of flesh, how do you ever recover from that? And Walter does not recover from that. It still is deep within him. So I'll just leave that case as it is. You can read about it if you're interested. What I found compelling about the book was that um, being a lawyer is not just shuffling papers. Maybe some of them do. Brian Stevenson doesn't shuffle papers. He goes into these maximum security prisons, and that isn't pleasant for him. I can't imagine going into the prison to see anyone. Um, Not only that, he talks about the criminals that he's handled, but the idea of women being in prison, what they go through, and how they got there. I mean, one woman gets there because of a nosy neighbor, and the prosecutor buys into it, and she winds up being in jail. Um, so and the main thing, the last thing that he talks about is children, juveniles being on death row. And Michigan had a notorious case for a juvenile being on death row. Because the Supreme Court, he was from Pontiac, and he was finally released from prison because he was um, a child. And it's the whole idea that children you don't fully mature until you're about 25. Your brain doesn't mature until you're around 25. um, but what I continue to think about when I was reading this book is that how could someone do the job that Brian Stevenson does? I was really compelled about that, and I kept going back and forth. Could I have done that if I were an attorney? And the answer is no, I could have never done what he did. Uh, and I wondered, well, how does he cope? Uh, he copes by running. And if I saw him recently on television, and he's buff for a 60-year-old man. Not only that, he plays the piano. So he has found ways to um, just get away from the stress of what he does. And he ends the book by saying that's what he thinks that his purpose is, and that it's purpose for work, and that it's work that is necessary. And I guess I should have begun with this. I only read this book because of Daniel had it on the book list. I would have never read this book because of the subject matter. But I'm so glad I did, because I do understand the role of a prosecutor, what they're supposed to do, why citizens should be more in tune with the legal system. So I'm grateful for that, and I would highly recommend the book.
Thank you, Sheila, for a wonderful presentation, and for starting us off with the very first book club discussion. I feel like the points that you provided us with were very insightful, and they do serve strongly as a book recommendation for those of you on this Zoom. So I'd like to open it up now to any discussion, whether it be comparing it to another book that you heard about, or asking Sheila a question about the article or the book. So if anyone would like to say any comments at this time, please go ahead.
I actually had something.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
Sorry.
You go ahead.
It's all right, Manny. It's all right. You can go ahead.
As she mentioned, the book had a movie. The movie is Just Mercy. I think it was Michael B. Jordan that played Brian in the movie. So I watched it a while ago and was brought me to tears. So if you want to check it out.
Yeah. I read something similar, but this was from a prisoner's perspective on like his life and how he got to that point in the area that he grew up in. And I was looking for the book on my bookshelf, but I gave it away to my cousin. But it made me think of that. So it's very, very interesting for sure.
I want to say something about the article. When I think of reparations, I think of slavery. I think of everything under the book, under the sun. But I never thought about taxes. Like I never thought about taxes. So I thought that was really interesting that he mentioned that in his article, and I really like that because it's true. It's true. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I definitely am going to read this article.
Yeah, I just skimmed it also, and it reminds me of something else I remember reading once around like I know like for instance like over the summer like talk about like defunding the police was a big thing, and another big thing they mentioned was that often police don't live in the communities that they work in, and one thing that was noted is so the police like say like from like whatever your town is, say like you're here in Southfield, the police may not live in Southfield, they may live in like Royal Oak, but the Southfield tax dollars go to them, and often like especially in like the big cities, like I'm from Chicago, or I live in the suburbs north of Chicago, and it's like a lot of the police make about six figures, and so what happens is that's over a lot of police, that's millions of dollars going out of the community through your taxes and to people that live in another community. That's another way that it's sort of like bled from the communities.
Well, about the police, Detroit did use Detroit in the past has mandated that police officers live in the community, but because of their housing stock, that wasn't feasible because it wasn't right that they should have to live in that house in Detroit's housing stock, and that's the problem with having trying to have police live in your community. Even though a police officer might live in my community, they are still the police. And the current things that I've read about the police lately is that the police in and of itself was never for a community. It was a way of enforcing the body politic. It was a way of controlling a community. And that's why people have come to the fore and say, no, you need to get rid of the police, because the police is really like a quasi army. If you and when I think about it, well, of course they're not really on my side. They may give that impression, but I don't find, after reading more about the police, they really are a quasi army. And given the fact that when Obama was in office, he sold many of these states arsenal that they used in the army. I mean, there's no reason for a police department to have these big the arsenals that they have, but that's another way. If you see this tank coming down your street, that's just uncontrolled in and of itself. So I think that's the issue that needs to be revisited. I'm not saying that you should defund the police, but I would revisit what the police officer's role is in the community.
You know what, Miss Sheila? That makes me think of what I told you back when I worked in library about how I had the interaction with the police and they came to my house.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Curly, I remember I told you this too. So for everyone here that doesn't know, um, okay, so I live in a kind of neighborhood in the northwest side of Detroit, so it's about 10 minutes away from school. So directly out of like the school's bubble is where I reside. And on this particular day, um, as per normal, helicopters are always circling around, so that was completely normal. But then they started flashing lights, like flashlights, into my home. And later on during the day, when my parents were returning from work, I went outside to go, help take in the groceries. You put on whoever's shoes is at the door, then you go outside and go grab the groceries and come back in. So on this particular day, it was colder, right? So I had on my hood and I was like, oh, you know what? Helicopter, let me take off my hood so that they don't suspect me. Later on in the evening, we hear knocks at the door. And sure enough, it's the police officers. They come to our door saying or accusing me that I am a drug lord. And I had an afro, and they told me that I fit a certain description. Yeah, so that's pretty much the story. And then afterwards, I got my hair cut, and I haven't had any problems with them since. So it's kind of like a void. Yeah, it's you.
I looked up, did the police have to have a record of having visited your home? And they don't. They can come to anybody's home and they can harass you, and they don't have to keep a record. They write down what they want to write down. And so, where's the oversight? Because that's terrifying that a police officer comes to this young man's house. Anything could have happened. So I don't think the police are above reproach, nor do I ever think that they have been, because Detroit used to have a SWAT team, and they were harassing. They weren't trying to help the community. They were harassing people. So I would be in favor of them not defunding. I'm not saying that, but I do think it needs to overhaul. Their mission probably needs to overhaul.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, the way I see it, it almost seems like the police don't have anyone hanging over their heads, holding them accountable for their actions. And with everything that's been going on right now, this is the first time that, or I shouldn't say first time, but we're finally coming to the realization that just because they hold a position that is so-called able to harass and threaten us, that isn't always what they're doing isn't always what's right, and that they should be held accountable for their actions. And Sheila, I didn't know that they didn't have to hold the record of their visit. I mean, that's absolutely insane to me that they could be going in and doing things, and we don't even know the actions that we would have to hold them accountable to, because we have no idea what happened. So um
Correct.
Julia, you had your hand up if you would like to.
Oh yeah, this is just reminds me of like a good book, well, like two good resources, like about like there's like one really good like podcast series I actually listened to called it's by this podcast called Behind the Bastards, and they did a series called Behind the Police, and it talked about the history of like the police from uh, slave patrols and union busting to like to the modern iteration. If anyone's interested, it was a really incredibly comprehensive. It was combined between a journalist and this hip hop artist named Propaganda Hip Hop. It was really good, and then also like I guess for a book maybe is uh, Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis. I got like I guess like a small plug is me and Ian McClure. We run we're running the school's Young Democratic Socialists of America, and we're actually by coincidence not trying to steal the thunder of my or BSU, because this is a great club, but we're also doing some reading series, and we're planning on doing Angela Davis, Our Prison's Obsolete soon, and I'd love to get involved with that, and maybe we'll do it through this club too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the more the merrier. So if we would be able to work together to make something great um, for the campus and for the students, I think it would be great. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and invite our second speaker to go ahead and present. So Daniel, go ahead.
You guys can hear me okay? Good? Okay. In case you guys haven't noticed, I am a white guy. So, by being a white guy, I can acknowledge that regardless of how much I read, how much I engage or devote myself towards, being an ally, I can never speak to some experiences and I can never fully understand the experiences. So, because of that, it led me to read a book called I Write What I Like by Steve Biko. So, a little history on Steve Biko. He's referred to as the father of Black consciousness. He was an activist down in South Africa during, they've had a whole bunch of stuff going on, and he wrote his collection of writings around in like 1969, around that time period. So I have some notes about it. Well, like the thing is, like in my role in pursuit of like being an ally, it's what it really means is some like a definition I've been really grappling with for some time. I think that for a bunch of white people that are looking to be allies, I think this is a must read because it's very informative. Um, what Steve Biko claims is Black consciousness is like it no longer seeks to reform the system because reforming the system implies that acceptance of major points around which the system revolves. There are exceptions, but exceptions do not make a lie of the rule. It merely just substitutes it. Um, the future will always be shaped by the sequence of present day events. And another thing is, Steve Biko has like the book revolves around four big points that we're all oppressed by the same system. Um, the fact that we are oppressed to varying degrees is a deliberate design to satisfy us. The scheme of the system must be made known, and then one criteria that must govern all our action is commitment. There's always interplay between the history of a people and their faith in themselves and like in their hopes for the future. Um, another point that Steve Biko makes is that a white liberal wants people to know that he's a white liberal and he's a good person. It doesn't really mean that the white liberal wants to change anything. So the fact that white racism and Black consciousness, the way they work together is just advocating at like a dinner table. So say I'm at the dinner table with my family and like someone makes a remark. It's the fact that I will interrupt them and tell them it's wrong. Versus if I let that happen, unless I have like a Black friend with me, then I'll make a remark. It's doing that in my own community or like in our own communities when people of other communities are not around. It's just behind the scenes kind of thing. Just passing those remarks just can't be tolerated. It's kind of what he advocates for. Is total identification within a oppressed group. So that's just kind of like what I got from that book. I thought it was a great read. I just want to reiterate that being a white guy is just just figuring out what I can do with being an ally because like I said, I'm not going through these experiences, so I can never really understand.
We appreciate having you as an ally. We love it.
Yes, Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And I also wanted to recognize all of the white supporters that are here because just like with any minority, just like with women, the only way to make change is by having those allies and by lifting the communities up. Because oftentimes they're the ones that have a stronger voice in our communities. So thank you for being here. I am a Hispanic, so I also identify as a minority, I suppose. But I'm very excited to see all of these conversations happening. So thank you all for participating and putting this together.
Yeah, I just want to say that a book club is only as successful as the participants make it. And so far, all of you have been so active and providing us with comments and stuff like that. So we are super excited to be continuing this on for the rest of the year and hopefully even after that. Thank you all for coming to our first meeting. It's not over yet. I'm just making that comment. Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, so Daniel's sort of summary of Steve Biko's work was really interesting to me, and it reminded me of this excerpt I had read this week from Lorenzo Camboa Irvin's 2013 book, Anarchism and the Black Revolution, in which he writes a lot about how sort of the legacy of colonialism in Africa is still just as present now as it was, during apartheid South Africa and before that. And he talks a lot about how, especially through debt and sort of financial manipulation, the larger economies like the US and China and Western Europe are able to like continue to hold outsized influence over those countries. And it is really interesting the way he touches on a lot of the same sort of themes and issues and how those haven't really gone away at all, even though, apartheid South Africa is gone. Many of the same issues exist in sort of a different guise, a different shroud. And I can link that article in the chat as well.
Okay. I thought, before I saw gold hands, how come when I clicked on raise hand, it didn't go gold?
Apparently the gold hands, that's clapping. I thought it was raise hands too. I was
Oh.
getting I was really confused. I think
Okay.
if you click participants, there's invite, mute, and raise hand. And if you press raise hand, then that's visible on the side board.
Oh, okay. I wanted to mention that I read Born Free. I think it's Born Free. That may not be the title. But anyway, it was by Trevor Noah. And Trevor Noah, his book talks about how South African apartheid was modeled on the United States and the Jim Crow laws. So they modeled themselves based on our society. Not only that, Hitler did the same thing. The Nazis did the same thing. They modeled how they could discriminate against the Jews based on what we had done in the US in slavery. So the United States has had an outsized influence on a number of parts of the world.
Yeah, I want to speak about the pre-colonization thing. I think Ian talked about. If you don't know, I'm from Nigeria. I've been here about 4 years, and I've been doing a lot of reading recently because even back home as Africans, we are not aware of all these things that are going on. For example, the French colonies in Africa still pay about $500 billion in taxes to France for pre-colonization and things like that. A lot of people don't know that. And the thing consistency is whenever someone brings this up like in the African Union, UN or something, they always find a way to push that person back down because other European countries are benefiting from this heavily because at least 5 or 6 African countries have their countries what they call what's the name? Sorry, I can't remember the word, but their wealth is stored basically in Europe. They have no control over it. They have to apply for their own money to spend in their own country and things like that. Even with the resources Africa has, I always ask myself, why does the continent with the most resources in the world have the most amount of the poorest people in the world? Just, you know, it's a lot of things going on in Africa. I think people should really look into.
Hi, sorry, I don't know if it's my turn to speak, but I see everybody muted. I also wanted to bring back this idea of how everything was modeled after the things that had happened in the US and take it a step further of when America was discovered, right? And this whole mythological creature we created out of Columbus. And Hispanic Heritage Month just ended, and going back in that history and how it was actually through the Spaniards that, you know, they pretty much committed genocide on all of the indigenous populations of the Americas. And I think that was one of the main foundations of how everything started to get modeled in the US in this sort of like hierarchical and like caste system based on like your race and where you're from. And the Taino history it's a part of history that is oftentimes erased in the US altogether in all of our historical books. So I highly encourage all of you to also watch what was this called? Columbus. Oof, there's a documentary that just came out in Prime Wire about Columbus. But yes, I'm learning about that as well. And it's just interesting to see how all of these dictatorships and all of this, you know, horrendous things that have happened all are founded off of the same idea.
Well, and then like I think it was like really useful that like you mentioned like how like for instance like the Nazis were based off Jim Crow, and like it reminds me like how like I've been seeing the term I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it out loud, but usually it's spelled BIPOC. I'm not sure if you just pronounce it like that. But like connecting Black and Indigenous because they've both been in a very like unique way oppressed, and it reminds me like not only was the Nazis based off Jim Crow, but also like their idea of genocide was based off of how effective we were at not only like in like subjugating Black people, but also exterminating natives and forcing them out of their land, like which is it's genocide. And so that's kind of how they modeled it. And I think it's useful to also like notice how a lot of these like racial subjugations and are tied with like sort of colonialism and how a lot of them are intertwined. Although like of course it's useful to talk about each unique scenario too.
Okay. Thank you all so much for participating. I'd like to spend the last few minutes just kind of reflecting on how this book club session went in the technicality form. So what are your guys' opinion on how this was hosted and what you would like to see in future book club meetings? Just as a reminder, today we did start our book club meeting later than we would usually, just because we did want to account for the diversity panel happening at 7 and we didn't want to overlap with that.
You might want to consider hosting it at 8 o'clock because people don't get out of class until 7 and 7:30. So, and then there's always something, it seems like everybody has the same event on the same day. I don't know if there's a university calendar out there or what, but there were so many events on today that if you go at 7:30, I don't think that's going to work. But just keep that in mind. But the other thing that I wanted to say, even though I like people talking about articles and books, I think that it would be a good idea to use the books for the next meeting that have been purchased by the student government. I mean, Then now that I've understand that Zoom can accommodate breakout rooms, it might be nice for those people who wanted to read um, stamped to get to talk to each other about the book and then come together. And especially since the books are there, we don't want them to just sit on the shelf.
All right. Suzanne, you want to go ahead?
Yes, as Sheila said, the books that are purchased, Daniel dropped them off this afternoon, and they're in our library system. They just need to be labeled, which will probably be done tomorrow. And we'll have them available. I mean, I think actually you could place holds on them right now if you want to. The titles of them are stamped. Oh my gosh, now I gotta remember the next titles, and I just put them over the other side of the room.
I can interrupt you with that.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so student government, we had a big meeting, Black Student Union. We decided to purchase Stamp, Color of Law, and Dying of Whiteness. A quick, I guess, summary. Color of Law talks about how, the government has been able to segregate people of color in America throughout history. So like basically, how there's ghettos and people always proposing, oh, why don't we just give them money, stuff like that. But it's like throughout history, it is like the author Richard Rothstein provides facts about how the government like legally or illegally, but legally segregated people and just would not allow people of color to live in white neighborhoods or suburban neighborhoods. And that's what led to society being the way it is. Stamp is just it's a remix. The one we got is a remix. The original book is like 400 something pages. But this one's just a quick remix. It's a quick read and just outline racism throughout history and how it came across into America. And then Dying of Whiteness. Actually, I haven't read this book yet. Trying to find the summary. If anyone knows.
Dying of Whiteness talks about the fact that there are white people will not they rather die than like have Medicaid in certain communities because that would benefit Black people. And so they rather not have the benefits for themselves. And so it's by a doctor, and he thoroughly documents how certain communities have refused to have certain benefits because they don't want them to benefit people who are poor or etc.
Yeah, the subtitle is, so it's Dying of Whiteness, and the subtitle is How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland. And we have 3 copies of each of these titles, so that's at least 9 books right there. And then we have the original stamped also, and we'll have those all available very soon, hopefully definitely by Friday, if not tomorrow sometime, for you to check out. And if you want to read any of those, they're going to be here in the library for you. And thanks to student government for purchasing those.
Hadi, go ahead.
So in regard to what you were asking about, like the technical aspect of it, one thing is like if we are gonna, have certain speakers talk about articles or books or movies, if we can sort of post what those articles, books, or movies are like earlier, just so people can have a chance to read them and bring in questions or bring in their viewpoints. I think that would be helpful. I know this was the first one, so we're kind of figuring out things, but that's just one quick thing. As far as scheduling goes, I mean, a lot of you guys know, we're a very small but active campus, so it's kind of hard to find a perfect time to put on an event or anything like that. So I think if we're able to record it and release it, I think that would be the biggest thing, to just get it out there. So if people can't attend and, when it's live, they can at least watch it and get some information out of that as well. So I think it's a good thing that we'll be recording and releasing them as well. So.
So moving forward,
Come
would
on,
you
Mike, I
guys
think
Hand
support?
raised.
Paul has something.
Paul,
I'm sorry, I can't find the hand raise button. It's not in my reactions either, so I apologize.
No problem.
So I just wanted to mention one other quick thing while we're talking about the question of incarceration, just to give it a local link. I'm connected with a group called the Hamtramck Free School, and they've been doing work with incarcerated folks, primarily men, although they have connections to one of the women's facilities in another part of the state, the Huron Valley Women's Prison. And I just shared a link with some of the poetry and artwork and documentation of their reading groups, writing groups that they've been running for a lot of years. So if anyone's interested in, if does not have connections with like folks who are incarcerated in the state of Michigan and are interested, I'd be happy to put you in touch with these folks. A lot of the people they work with are actually serving juvenile life sentences, which have since been ruled unconstitutional by the Michigan state. But for a long time, because Michigan didn't have the death penalty, they had these juvenile life sentences. So you could be sentenced to a life in prison without the possibility of parole under the age of 18. And this falls disproportionately on communities of color and the poor and socially and economically ostracized. So they're doing really good work there. I just wanted to make that quick plug. The other thing is I did come here just listening. I'm sorry to be talking, but as a faculty member, this is the most exciting thing I've been a part of at LTU in like 7 years. I mean, maybe second only to like the protest that happened this summer. That was freaking awesome. But this is like I'm like not kidding. And so I guess what I want to say is that for those of you who don't know me, I'm a faculty member of the humanities department, and I have a lot of freedom in terms of the classes I could offer at the junior senior elective level. And so in one sense, I don't want to like change or offer anything that's not happening here already. But if these book clubs continue and there are folks who want to like continue having these conversations, I feel like I can decolonize some LTU resources and work with y'all to like create a course where we can basically do this kind of work in that course. And I wouldn't say, I'm not presenting myself as an expert. I mean, I've done work in Black studies and Black poetics and a little bit of stuff in critical race theory and in the Black radical tradition. I consider myself a student in that area, but I could figure out a way to make something happen. And I know there are other faculty who share this. Our new professor of MediaComm, Dr. Joyce Schaefer, is offering some really cool courses next semester where she's looking at questions of race and identity in film. So there are more courses like this that are being offered, but I just wanted to throw that out there. I can't attend all of the reading groups, but I'll put my email in the chat, and if as you all are talking, or if anyone has ideas for courses that they would like to have offered, know that I would love to listen and figure out ways to have that happen, because my dream is that my courses look like what you guys are doing here. It's just you get to write papers for me, right? And so if there's any way that I can be of support in this capacity or any other ways in which you feel like faculty, I know Ty Faulkner works with your group and Ty's amazing. But I just wanted you to know there are others folks who are here and eager to help. So thank you again for organizing this and hosting this.
Thank you for coming. I will actually be reaching out to you soon. Probably tonight. If not tonight, tomorrow you'll be getting an email from me.
Just don't be offended if it takes me a day or two to respond. I respond to all of them. It's just I get a lot of emails, but I will respond for sure. And I look forward to having further conversation.
I'm the same way, so it's okay.
Well, thank you all for, I just keep saying thank you. I'm just so excited that this has been such a great first meeting. It's honestly, it's eye-opening to see how many of you have been so invested in having a conversation like this, because it's not always easy. So again, thank you all for coming. And moving forward, I just wanted to see what you guys think about having our next meeting. So I know we usually do the last Wednesday, but the last Wednesday of November ends up being on the 25th, which is the first day of our break. So I just wanted to see if you guys would prefer that to be the Wednesday before that one, just so we're not doing this on the first day of break, or if you guys are fine with it. So what are your guys' opinion on this?
It works for me. My sorority has an event like right before it. Our event ends at 8. So I'll be hopping on a little late, but it works for me.
Are you
Does
asking then
and
about November 18th doing it?
so
A week
yeah, so having it November 18th instead of the 25th, just so it's because I know the first day of break can be kind of crazy for some people, whether they're going home, and especially because it's going to be everyone moving out from campus, because we're going to be online for the rest of the semester. So I feel like that day might be a little bit hectic. So I just wanted to see if you guys think that the 18th might be better.
How do you want us to vote? I guess.
Just express
opinion.
opinion.
Yeah, maybe just put it in the chat or something. Just yes, no.
A thumbs up.
Yeah.
And you guys agreed
Okay.
that it was at 8 p.m., right?
Yeah.
Okay. I can make the edit real quick on Google Calendar too.
And I'm sorry, I may have missed something, but was there a list that we could see what is going to be discussed next month?
So we are working with the library with Suzanne and Sheila about developing like a library guide. And in this library guide will be, book recommendations, what will be discussed, like a sign-up sheet for speakers. So everything will be on that library guide. Once we finish it, we'll just send it out.
Okay, so for each month, we'll know exactly what's going to be discussed.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the next meeting, I would say just kind of expect the main 3 books that we had ordered for the library to be discussed, just because we want those to be circulating. I mean, we bought them so that they are of use for students. So again, it's Stamped, Dying of Whiteness, and The Color of Law, all available at the library, the LTU library. But when we do send out the e-news article with the meeting link, it will have some information on there.
Yeah, so just place a hold on them and then you'll get a notification that they're ready for you. And Sheila, you're working in the office tomorrow, right? You'll be in here in the library? Sorry, I'm
Yes.
actually in the library, not
Yes.
at the lake.
Yes.
Okay, because I won't be in here, but maybe you can follow up with them with Amy. I put them in her basket and I'll send her an email
Okay.
too.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like November 18th is the winner. So we will shoot for that day for our next meeting. So until then, thank you all for coming so much. If you have anything, any suggestions, any questions, any concerns, you can feel free to reach out to student government or BSU, or all of us. We are heavily involved in making sure that this is a successful event that continues. So yes, as Daniel said in the chat, do spread the word to your friends. We are hoping to only grow from here. And we are very excited to be continuing this on.
Can someone reach out to Victoria to update the flyer and send that to Stu event when I can add it to the website as well as update the TV monitor and the atrium? And do that.
I have a quick question. So who is the official advisor for the Black Student Union?
Ty Faulkner.
Okay.
All right, if there are no other questions or comments, thank you all for coming and have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
No.